Welcome, and thank you for joining us for our session, Humanities in a Changing Climate. We would like to acknowledge that this conference is being hosted by the Graduate Center of the City University of New York, which is located on Mannahatta, the traditional unceded territory of the Lenape. It's now my pleasure to turn the session over to Mark PEDELTY.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the session. And I'm going to share a screen here to get it started. All right. Sorry. Our project is called Humanities in a Changing Climate, and it's funded by Mellon, based at the University of Illinois. And the four of us working on it together, I'll introduce in just a second, and then we'll each introduce ourselves as we get our part started. In terms of format, we're going to do about 10 minutes each and make sure we leave time at the end for discussion among panelists, but also from the audience, any questions or thoughts you have, so we have an interaction. The project we were doing is called Field Media, and we've been engaged in this for about 3 years now. And it really is about each of us individually doing field work, collaborating with it. So collaborating with our communities and then collaborating digitally across the globe, really, as we're doing this. So to introduce the participants, one who is not here is Tara Hatfield, who's working in Tanzania, and also Rebecca DIRKSEN, who we'll be hearing from last, is doing her work in Haiti. Elja Roy is doing her work in India and Bangladesh in the mangroves and Shunabana mangroves. And then finally, Yan Peng, who's done her work, composition and research in China. And I've titled my talk here, titled it as From Loud to Silence. And in doing so, I've used the titles from two pieces that came out of this, because the work we're doing is really co-production with the communities we're working with. And the first piece is a music video called Loud, and then eventually a documentary called Sentinels of Silence. And when it came time to choose a project, as everybody's choosing what they're going to do for this musical video project, I really, to a certain extent, showed a lack of imagination. The group EcoSong that I've been with for, been doing work with for about, I guess it's going on 5-6 years now. And I just thought, well, we're doing music video because I've done music videos with local groups here in Minnesota mainly, and it's worked out rather well with bringing organizations and artists together. And I thought I'd do that around this issue of marine noise, particularly as it affects the orca. And as you'll see, it at first didn't work great, but eventually I think it worked out pretty well. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today. First, for a little quick context that you need to know this piece of information, there's several threats to the southern resident killer whales, of which there's about 72 left. One is reduced population and size of their prey, the Chinook salmon. Second one is toxins. The third problem is noise, and that's the one that this project is focused on. And so made a music video with the local community or members of the local community, particularly in the musical community around the Salish Sea. And it was okay, but in terms of some of the aesthetics, I wasn't completely pleased with how it turned out as a work of music, popular music, art, etc. Nor as sort of a political project, because a topical piece like this has certain aims that part of the artistry is to have some sort of impact. But as a research project, it had really was kind of revelatory and led to the second project. And so I've already written about and talked a lot about the sort of boundary objects that I was dealing with as the project that we were dealing with, specifically genre, gender, international, and interspecies as boundary objects that kind of came up productively through this research, particularly as challenges arose. And really, one of the best parts of this project is stumbling onto a group that was doing this kind of research that was kind of, as is so often the case with ethnography or fieldwork, kind of tacit and almost muted to go along with the theme here, and that came out through this project and therefore were part of making the documentary. So I'm referring to this as sonic resilience. and musical resonance. And what happened was that, you know, drawing on the sound from the orca, that those in doing bioacoustics have really drawn from that to show us that why a quieter marine environment is necessary, and that it's really important that it's basically blinding a whale to have such noise around them, and particularly the whale watching industry, which is the most proximate noise there is. And so I made this music video that partly is about that. And through doing that, encountered people like Timothy Reagan. Timothy Reagan was the science director of the Marine Mammal Commission. And he was one of those lone voices that, despite the power of the local industry, really prefiguring not only sort of policy, but also kind of the political economy of the media and even environmental resistance. People were focused on the toxins, people were focused on the Chinook and the dams, but kind of not talking about noise. And so these folks became part of the documentary, and I'll sort of give you a glimpse of that at the very end here. And that led to the film Sentinels of Silence, and the film I'm going to show you apart from. But what I want to talk about here as far as sonic resilience and musical resonance is, one, there's a single song that threads through both, and the context means everything, is the meaning of that song and what was able to do. And, you know, when I bring up meaning, therefore kind of the artistry and aesthetics of it as well. And finally, to sort of bring it full circle, I put there that slide there that says baby J-pod orca ailing, whale watch tours ordered to keep away. That just happened a couple days ago. And the only reason they were able to do that is because there was a policy change last December. And one of the things that I'm mentioning as far as musical resonance, what can a song do as part of this? What can media do as part of this? What can scholars do as part of this? I would never, ever argue that a film, you know, made a sea change in this issue. But I would argue it's quite obvious that one thing that did happen is that, well, I know it happened. And Tim's one of the people that told me, all of the people making the policy decision that led to that sea change last December watched the film when it came out in October. They were part of the screenings. They came even to an event that we had to see this film. And it was really shocking for those that were involved to see that this change would take place. And so in essence, then, this was a small part of a much larger and longer movement to get this to happen. So when I bring up resilience, before I show you at the very end a short trailer from the resulting film, which kind of shows how the song changed, I'm not talking about the kind of resilience here that's been rhetorically employed as adaptation. So forget about doing anything about climate change. We'll just deal with it. It can be very conservative. For example, this US Climate Resilience Toolkit is all about how to protect your assets, how to be resilient in protecting your assets. That's very different form of resilience. As with all terms, there's valences that can even be opposite, and resilience is certainly one of them. But rather thinking about it as forms of resilient organizing, how can people not just sort of react, but in fact keep going to do something in the face of climate change, in the face, as we'll talk about later, COVID in the next session. And I think this was an example of that, resilience of a community that kept going to try to do something different with it. And also what it brought home for me was that music is a requisite for resilience, not sort of ancillary, not sort of off to the side, not to be just purely seen as something separate from the world of engaging with politics, et cetera, but also very central. A book in that regard that's always been really influential to me was Mark Matern's Acting in Concert, where he makes the case that not only can music be part of this, but it's hard to imagine any act of human organizing for which music is not central. So what I want to do to finish up then at the end of my 10 minutes here is I want to just quickly show you a trailer from that film. And this trailer, I think, will give you a sense of how this song was kind of repackaged. Unfortunately, you won't get to hear the whole song like you do in the music video, but the trailer gives you a sense of how the song gives kind of the dynamic and feel at the beginning and the end especially, but other parts as well, that fits into, is imbricated, is intertextually connected to everything that is said in this film by these activists and organizers.
Loud and undone.
Almost 10 to 12 hours a day they are surrounded by these boats, and the boats come close enough and the noise is loud enough that it reduces the whale's ability to forage, to hear their surroundings.
Unfortunately, I think the influence of whale watching on the southern resident killer whales has been overstated, actually to the detriment of the southern residents.
3 days after I filed the initiative, we were sued by 4 whale watching companies who are represented by Pacific Whale Watching Association.
These are some of the most restrictive regulations for whale watching on Earth.
The Whale Watching Association had actually hired a lobbyist, and that lobbyist had been at work nearly since the day we recommended both the moratorium and the licensing system.
We're willing to stay 6 feet away from a person to prevent them from getting ill. How about staying 650 yards away from an orca so they can eat?
You can barely hear the salmon run.
All right, and I'll stop the share there. And I'm just before we get the signal here at the end of my 10 minutes, we'll now move on. Now, earlier we were dealing with the handoff Jan and Elja as far as some of the tech. Given that, Elja, will Elja go next or Jan? I apologize for asking here in live, but.
Yeah, I'll go next and Elja will help me with the slides.
All right, great, thanks. So next up is Jan Peng.
Thank you, Mark. Hello, everyone. My name's Yan Peng. I'm a composer and assistant professor of music at Point Park University. Dancing Upstream, Current Issues of Environmental Awareness as Performance is about water pollution of the Funan River in Chengdu, China. When I was in elementary school, I learned the song Catching Pound Loach. The lyrics are, the water filled up the pound, the rain is also stopped. Big brother, please take me to catch some pound loach. 池塘的水满了，雨也停了，大哥哥好不好？带我去捉泥鳅。I went home and asked my dad to take me to catch some pound loach. He said, I have only seen pound loach when I was your age. Don't you see how polluted the water is? I was so upset that the song I was taught was a lie. And 10 years later, in 2008, I entered Sichuan Conservatory of Music and had my first composition lesson with Professor Minju Song. I was asked to write about clean and clear Funan River. The lyrics is, Funan River, clean and clear, running from ancient time to present. I wrote, 渡江沿水清清哟，从古流到今。I struggled to continue as the river is dark and green, nothing like the given lyrics. Professor Song said the river was clean and clear when I was your age. Now it is polluted by trash and waste. I was sad because that brought back my memories of being lied to in children's song, and now by contributing to false lyrics, I'm becoming part of the lie. Little did I know in 2018, everything came together. My passion about music composition and bring awareness of climate change. I joined the Field to Media project team and focus on water pollution in Sichuan. I reached out to my community contacts to ask about their perspective on the issue, especially Professor Song. He has written several musical compositions regarding his love of rivers in the area. We collectively bear witness to our current times and bring awareness to threatened ecosystem, as well as draw sound material from endangered environmental sources. Because of the political atmosphere in China, my community collaborators provide me with the resources, but were hesitant to be on camera for the performance since it's a US-funded project. Thus, I brought the elements back to the US and turned into a theatrical music and dance production. Here you see the creation team, Minju Song as composer, me as a composer and pianist, Jae Song as choreographer, and Bionic as sound designer. Dancing Upstream fused my lived experience to theorize possibilities and techniques in the creation of work. Using Sichuan opera with American street dance highlights the intercultural nature of the project. I will show 2 excerpts to unfold the interdisciplinary approach: sound design, piano, and dance. Bionic creates a soundscape of running water and frog croaks turning into industrial one with sounds of metal working. I use traditional single-line Chinese melodies and dissonance intervals and quartal harmony on the piano to portray the flowing river and the destruction. Jae Song used breakdancing techniques to investigate and theorize issues of environmental justice resulting in the movement. The Fibonacci sequence is the base of the composition because its connection to naturally occurring spiral structures such as nautilus shells and flower petals. You will hear the percussive piano sound of Fibonacci sequence. 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. In addition to the piano, I drum on steel garbage cans as symbols of pollution. Jae Song employed gestures like reaching into the river and throwing away pollutions, symbolizing the cleaning river. This action resulted in thinking about how ethically dispose chemicals like phosphorus. Jae Song gathers, changes, and redistributes the chemicals on the stage away from the river. And here we'll see the second excerpt. The final moments of dancing. Thank you. The final moments of dancing upstream show people from all different walks of life coming together who have no choice but to collaborate or risk the extinction as species. This piece embodied China's ongoing structure to be globally connected and industrious nation with consequences, which have resulted in unacceptable environmental threat. I hope by working together, the children's songs can pass the test of time, can be true to my father, Professor Song, me, and for all generations that follow. Thank you.
Okay. So I am next. Thank you, Yan, for the wonderful presentation. And I just have to switch to mine now. Okay. Can you all see my screen? Okay. So my name is Elja Roy. I got my PhD from the University of Minnesota, and I'm currently an assistant professor at the University of Memphis, and I teach film and video production. So my dissertation, this is a part of my continuation of my dissertation research. So it has been about Sundarbans, the world's largest mangrove forest, and it's shared between India and Bangladesh. So if you just can pay attention to the space here. So this is Sundarbans, the world's largest mangrove forest, and this is an archipelago shared between India and Bangladesh. And being a shared territory, it brings its own regulatory pitfalls, regulatory discrepancies. And also, since this is so close to Bay of Bengals, it is susceptible to climate change and one of the most vulnerable areas in terms of climate change. So, as I mentioned, it is susceptible to climate change. There are multiple threats that are looming at the same time: rising sea level and increasing salinity of water. Since this is right above the Bay of Bengal, the frequent cyclones arising from the Bay of Bengal threatens the very existence of the forest, because this forest acts as a shield that protects densely populated cities like Dhaka, which is the capital of Bangladesh, and Calcutta, which is the capital of the state which has Sundarban in India, Calcutta. So basically, these are the cities which are densely populated, but Sundarban is acting as a shield to protect these cities. But what happens is there are also 7.2 million people living in these forests. So in between these islands, there are some as protected forests, some are villages where people live. So what happens is whenever a storm hits, these are the people, the most vulnerable people who contribute very least to the global carbon economy. They suffer the most. Also, with the increasing population, there are very few ways for this 7.2 million people to earn their livelihood. The usual one is fishing and harvesting for honey in the forests, but with increased salinity of water and vanishing islands, it's very difficult for them to find enough fish to catch or collect enough honey, and they are forced to go more towards the protected forests, and there they become vulnerable to tiger attacks. So I started learning about this forest since my childhood, but then again, I never knew that there were 7.2 million people living in this forest and how difficult life is for them. I always learned about this place as a wilderness, as a forest where the tigers, the Royal Bengal tigers, live. So during my master's, during the years 2012 and 13, I started working in projects which are related to Sundarbans as a journalist. And then when I joined my PhD program in 2016, I was asked by Mark PEDELTY, who is my advisor. So I then became a part of the Field to Media project. And Mark has mentioned a little that it is funded by the Mellon Foundation, and Jan also mentioned a little about the project, and Rebecca will later on bring everything back together about the project. So we were researchers working in different parts of the world, and we were making music videos. So as a part of Field to Media, I first went to Bangladesh, and I learned what kind of musical responses there are to save the forests of Sundarban. So Bangladesh government has proposed its largest coal burning power plant in the very fringe of Sundarbans. And since it has been proposed, there were multiple protests by academics, artists, activists, journalists. And this is just an image of one of the rallies that they made. And I went there and I learned that there are these set of artists and musicians who are writing and singing songs to protest the proposed coal burning power plant. And I filmed them, and I also went to the Indian part of Sundarbans, where there are multiple native groups who are also writing and singing songs about the forest. But then again, theirs are more, I'd say, localized in terms of they talk about the forest, they talk about how the forest is beautiful, how the forest acts as their mother, how the forest is providing their livelihood, how beautiful it is. So there are folk music from the region, the forest, and they also sing these songs. There are multiple purposes for these songs, one being preserving their culture, the second being they perform it for money, as in there is this booming tourism, ecotourism in the region. So they do perform these musical performances to entertain the guests, the tourists, and also to raise awareness, to talk about what's going on in the forests and what are the things that they need to survive. So when I went to Bangladesh for the first time and I made the music video for the Field to Media project, I just recorded this. So I'll just share the first few minutes.
সুন্দরবন নিজেই একটা দেশ। আমরা মনে করি যে সুন্দরবনের আবার বাংলাদেশ ইন্ডিয়া কি।
আমাদের এবারের গানে যে গো ব্যাক গেট আউট ইন্ডিয়া যে লাইনটি আমরা ব্যবহার করছি, আমরা গানের ভূমিকাতে সবসময় বলতে চাই যে পৃথিবীর সমস্ত জনগণ, লড়াকু জনগণ আমাদের সহযোদ্ধা। সুতরাং এই গানে আমরা ভারতের জনগণকে আমরা আমাদের বন্ধু হিসেবেই পেতে চাই। মূলত আমরা এই শব্দে প্রতিবাদ জানাচ্ছি ভারতের যে বাণিজ্য নীতি, পররাষ্ট্রনীতি কিংবা তার রাষ্ট্রীয় যে নীতি, মূলত গো ব্যাক গেট আউট ইন্ডিয়া শব্দে আমরা তার সেই রাষ্ট্রীয় নীতিটাকে আমরা বিরোধিতা করছি। নিশ্চয়ই ভারতের জনগণ আমাদেরও বন্ধু।
Okay, so this song is called Go Back, Get Out India because the coal burning power plant I just mentioned is a joint venture between Indian government and Bangladeshi government. And me being an Indian citizen, I did not know about the tacit realities, the implicit biases and the atrocities between the two nations. And when I went there, I learned about it, and that's when I realized that whatever is happening in Sundarbans and the movement that is happening is something that I cannot express within this 8-minute long music video. So then I went back again in the summer of 2019, and I extensively shot the forest and interviewed more people and tried to learn more about what's happening in the forests and how people are musically responding to what's happening in the forest. And then I made this documentary film. I'll just share an excerpt from the film.
একশো 93টা দেশ থেকে সুন্দরবনে আসে সুন্দরবনকে উপভোগ করতে। ইকো ট্যুরিজমের নামে যে উল্লাস যে আনন্দ চলছে, সুন্দরবনবাসী হিসাবে আমরা প্রত্যেকটা মানুষ আমরা অখুশি। এত নোংরা করে যাচ্ছে নদীবক্ষে যে জলজ যে প্রাণী কটা আছে, ডলফিন, কুমির, হোয়াইট ফিশ, ভেটকি, বাগদা, এই ধরনের সুন্দরবনে 110-20 প্রজাতির মাছ আমরা আনুমানিক আমরা করে বলছি, যেটা দেখতে পাচ্ছি চোখে। তো সেই প্রজাতির মাছ কটা অচিরেই ধ্বংস হচ্ছে, কেননা মোটর ভেহিকেল চলছে 6 সিলিন্ডার 4 সিলিন্ডার ইঞ্জিন, জঙ্গলের ইন্টারন্যাশনাল কোর এরিয়া দিয়ে চলছে তারা।
So as I mentioned that there is a booming ecotourism business in the area, and then again the tourists aren't really respectable towards the lives of the villagers there and also to the forest. So there is of course an issue of trash, and then people throwing trash everywhere, and then people using really loud music boxes and treating it as just a picnic area where they can use loud music. So this is also a part of the protest that's happening in the Indian side of the forest. And having made the film, I also now plan to move forward and work on sacred groves, which is the reserved forest areas in different parts of India. And these are the reserved forests for deities. These are devoted to the deities, and there are also musical practices around preserving the forests. And I just plan to make documentary films or just film such practices in future. So that is my moving forward. Thank you very much for your time, and I'll stop sharing my screen here. Rebecca is next.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Elza. And I will share my screen right now as well. All right, hopefully everything is working there. All right, greetings, and thank you for spending some time with us this afternoon. I am Rebecca DIRKSEN, Associate Professor of Ethnomusicology at Indiana University and co-founder and current director of the Diverse Environmentalisms Research Team. It's an honor to join my colleagues, Dr. Mark PEDELTY, Dr. Yan Pang, and Dr. Elza Roy, in discussing our collaboration toward figuring out an applied ecomusicology for a changing climate. You've now heard a bit about our music videos relating to pressing environmental concerns in the Salish Sea, China, and Bangladesh. Momentarily, I'll introduce you to the music video from Haiti. Moreover, I encourage you to view the 5th video in this series not being discussed today, which was filmed in Tanzania under the leadership of our colleague Tara Hatfield. You can find that video all of the others on ecosong.net. Besides sharing more about how this project has played out in Haiti, where I have been involved, my purpose with the rest of this presentation is to very quickly introduce some general methodological concerns and goals that we have used to guide us. So let's turn toward Haiti, where I have been actively engaged for the better part of the last 2 decades and where I've spent many years living. A few points to note. The Global Climate Risk Index over the past decade has routinely ranked Haiti among the top 3 most vulnerable countries to the effects of extreme weather events related to climate change. In fact, in a place where superlatives are so often detrimentally thrown about, Haiti has the dubious distinction of claiming that top position multiple times. Of course, there are many complex environmental matters alongside economic, political, and social matters tied up in the equations that attempt to calculate vulnerability well beyond what we can realistically discuss in 10 minutes. But in short, we're talking about trying to see through the entangled layers of precarity and a rapidly changing climate that is experienced in multiple dimensions. For the sake of this project, the Haiti team decided to focus on deforestation and came up with a video about the importance of planting trees. The advanced state of Haiti's deforestation today is a matter of deep concern. While imagining the possibilities for what we wanted to communicate with this music video, we considered the complexities of context and history. Among concerned onlookers, it's widely understood that many Haitians cut down trees for charcoal. And in fact, a punishing lack of access to energy sources has led to over-reliance on charcoal among those who simply cannot afford other means to cook their food. Yet deforestation is far more acutely and accurately attributed to centuries of land overuse, extending back to the colonial plantations, with their ecologically demanding cash crops of sugar and coffee that required the clearing of vast expanses of land. Shortly after independence in 1804, a rapacious international logging industry arose and flourished from about the 1820s to the 1930s, stripping the western third of Hispaniola of most of its remaining old-growth hardwood forests, including the prized acajou or mahogany trees that were shipped off to make furniture for consumers in North America and Europe. These interrelated matters are structurally rooted in a slow violence that perniciously unfolds over time and incrementally increases the pressures on those with the least power and resources. Today, the population is facing dramatically changing rain and drought patterns, affected in part by the altered composition of the island's forests and land. But with the immediacy of the Petro-Caribe oil scandal, current constitutional crisis, rising authoritarian regime, presidential assassination, and internationally complicated governmental disarray, and waves of economically, politically, and ecologically driven immigration and subsequent aggressive deportations back to Haiti, which have all brought extreme economic strain and instability for the vast majority of the population, simultaneously balancing and indeed caring about the often slower developing processes of environmental degradation is really extremely difficult to manage. That long-term view, for example, of the importance of trees for human health and well-being is hard to cultivate with so many other urgent matters of survival to face. And all of these entangled challenges that have only increased in scale and intensity over the last several years deeply impacted our abilities to efficiently complete this project. Specifically, these circumstances have dramatically curtailed circulation throughout the country and have regularly compromised the safety of all partners. Regardless, while it took a lot of time and repeated revision of plans, we did ultimately come up with a music video that we like. With the song we came up with, M'pral planter un pied bois, or I will plant a tree, our goal is quite simply to communicate the importance of planting trees for the benefit of future generations. Thus, this is an effort about recalibrating the narratives that oversimplify or reduce the weight of blame onto the shoulders of those who really have little to do with the roots of the problem. Allow me to introduce some of our key collaborators. The first is Comprefilo, who before his unfortunate passing last year in July of 2020, he was a prominent journalist and an activist for democracy. as well as a very well-known and beloved advocate for Vodou, the Afro-Haitian sacred worldview, which is also a sacred ecology in its own right. Less known about Kumbra Philo's involvement, however, was that he led a decades-long campaign to plant trees across Haiti, specifically focusing on the giant mapu, or silk cotton trees, that have a great sacred significance. Also involved was the artist BIC, or Roosevelt Sayan, who is very well known for his socially engaged lyrics and his mentorship of dozens of young and upcoming artists. Fairly recently, he was also named a UNICEF ambassador. Furthermore, I was joined behind the camera by filmmaker Candy Verilius, with whom I have also collaborated on a number of other film-based projects over the years, including an earlier environment-themed musical documentary called Zafer Fatra, or The Affair of Trash. Mr. Verilius is an ethnographic documentarian who has also produced a number of music videos over his career. He directed this video and guided collaboration among all of the participants. So I'll now try to share some excerpts from this video. We will see how well they play directly through the PowerPoint, so bear with me.
Gade noy nan bouche montagne yo, nan bouche montagne yo. Gade paille nan tête rivière yo, nan tête rivière yo. Gade faille en bas qu'elle la terre, gade saleté en bas votre la mer. Gade trail pied boyo, trail pied boyo, trail pied boyo. M'bral blanc ton pied bois. Bon passé, m'bral blanc ton pied bois. M'bral blanc ton pied bois. Et si un jour m'da coupé youn, m'a planté toi. M'bral blanc ton pied bois. Bon passé, m'bral blanc ton pied bois. M'bral blanc ton pied bois. Et si un jour m'da coupé youn, m'a planté toi. Pour pays a pas couché. Faut que nous camper tant qu'on pied mabou. Hey, assiette carton sous table à Rio. Oh, go de plastique dans tout ego. Ouais, nan di dégagé pas péché. Maman la t'es presque séché. Boulon la t'es foiré. En nous barré soufflé. Ouais, m'bral blanc ton pied bois. Bon passé, m'bral blanc ton pied bois. Hey, m'bral blanc ton pied bois. Et si un jour m'da coupé youn, m'a planté toi. Oui, m'bral blanc ton pied bois. Bon passé, m'bral blanc ton pied bois. M'bral blanc ton pied bois. Et si un jour m'da coupé youn, m'a planté toi.
So as you saw in the video, the process of making this, in fact, involved cultivating trees from seeds to saplings and actually planting them in the hills above Port-au-Prince. Crucially, the success of this project has relied on choosing the right group of colleagues who have all already demonstrated long-term commitment to matters of social and environmental justice. To back out of this particular case study and to again look toward the whole, our overarching goal as a team, or rather a collective of international teams, has been to find visually, sonically, and narratively relevant ways to speak to urgent environmental issues in each of these field sites in ways that respond to locally held values and priorities. To recall what we've heard today, the thematic issues portrayed in these videos range from noise and water pollution to deforestation and declining biodiversity, And the musical treatments, from choice of musical genre to perspectives on musical activism, vary greatly. With environmental justice at the heart of our collaboration, each video issues a call directly at both local and global audiences. The making of these videos has involved an exploratory process of co-creation between scholars and community partners, but with the leadership fully in the hands of the local actors, in placing emphasis on the discussions and activities that bring each film into being. This process has involved a text-making methodology that we are calling field to media, a term intended to describe the pragmatic use of video production during research to study and amplify eco-musical responses to environmental challenges. Generally speaking, the goal is to marry the classic ethnographic practices of active participant observation and participatory action research with an applied or activist bent that focuses on film as the medium for communication. Among the most important achievements of this project has been fostering leadership and ownership of the resulting music videos by our collaborators in the field, who are positioned as researchers, curators, and producers. In encouraging this deeper level of involvement in co-creation, we have aimed to depart from work patterns more typically characteristic within ethnographically oriented disciplines. For example, of simply capturing audio-video documentation to be analyzed and edited after the period of fieldwork is done. Rather, this is a simultaneous endeavor, a process of discussion, negotiation, and decision-making about how to create a film about something all of us involved see as being important. As a research team with many members scattered around the globe, we have actively tried to figure out exactly how everything gets balanced and performed. We might think of this methodology as working toward empirical justice. And with that, I would like to invite all of my fellow panelists back onto the screen so that we can open this up for questions.
Yeah, and while we're waiting for folks to think of questions, or maybe even better yet, also comments, thoughts, exchange from everybody here, I just want to say what an incredible privilege it has been to work with Rebecca and Jan and Elza over the last 3 years. It's been really incredible. So does anybody have any thoughts or questions, or? Looks like Naomi might.
First of all, thank you. I'm kind of blown away by the work that you're all doing. It's really incredible. I just wanted to give a little heads up for any of our audience members. If you do have questions and thoughts, please put them in the Q&A box that you will find perhaps at the bottom, perhaps at the top of your screen, and we'll read those out and work through them. And I think we've already started to get something in here from Jane Sugarman, so I will silence myself.
So the question says, thank you for a very stimulating session. Who do you hope will see these productions, and what strategies have you designed for disseminating them? Who wants to start?
I want to start by thanking Elza for seeing the Q&A box. I overlooked that, so thank you for bringing us to that. I will say this. My talk was kind of about that issue, that I realized more and more it's about kind of what might be called narrow casting. That in this case, what people that do strategic communication think about it as a primary audience, those that could actually make the change, was kind of what I had in mind, actual policymakers, et cetera. And the secondary audience being maybe mobilizing and those that would care about it in a movement. And of course, maybe a tertiary is hoping that others take interest in it as well. And some have, but it's not the kind of thing that probably I would say has been disseminated largely beyond that. And one of the tricks we're working on is how do we disseminate it to our most important audience, that is students, as far as curriculum, that kind of thing has been something we've been working on.
Okay, so the next question we have here is wonderful work. I don't mean this at all negatively, but I wonder if you have been able to ascertain if there's any measurable impact. Who wants to start?
I think the statement about planting trees, maybe Rebecca, have you had a chance yet? Or since it's, yours is so new that maybe you don't see that kind of visceral effect if we can ever get there?
Yeah, this is such a fabulous question, but also an extremely challenging one. As I think quite pointedly critiqued in my portion of the presentation, there are so many other issues that are happening within Haitian society right now that frankly, planting trees is maybe not the urgent priority for getting through the end of today. That said, we are really trying to live up to the legacy that Comprofilo left behind in his decades of trying to encourage greater appreciation for Mapu trees in particular, and their critical importance as kind of these nature-made cisterns that kind of protect the larger flora and fauna of the environment, as well as holding great sacred significance. And so we have experimented with trying to plant saplings and distribute them to various lacours, various yards around Haiti to see whether we can encourage people to actually put these in the ground and take care of them until they're large enough to be able to take root on their own. But again, it's a very, very challenging prospect right now, and something that I think is just going to require, as Comprofilo showed us, decades of commitment. So this is a long haul process, I believe.
I have a wonderful question from Tyler. Tyler says, Yan mentioned politics as a barrier for her project, example for using US grant funds for the said project. I'm curious what other barriers you have run up against and how you have worked with and around those challenges: time, funds, ethical issues. This is like a really broad question, and we all have like hours of stories we each can tell here. So I just start with one thing. Since I was working with US grant and I'm an Indian citizen, I was in Bangladesh, where already Bangladesh, the citizens of Bangladesh feel like India puts in a lot of pressure into the country, into doing something that the country wouldn't have otherwise done, because Bangladesh is like encircled by India in 3 sides and the rest is an ocean. So there was a little, I'd say, discomfort at the very beginning. So yes, that was a challenge. And I was also, Bangladesh wants 2 countries out of their territory. One is US, one is India, and I was representing partially both. So it did take a good amount of time, communication, and telling them as in what I am, what the project is, who I am, and what are the kind of work that I am trying to do, what is my research, what is the objective of the whole project, and how there are different researchers working in different parts of the world, and how I intend to distribute this project, if I can call it distribution. So for example, taking it to conferences, taking it to film festivals. So it did take a while, but then again, I think the very base was not me asking my collaborators to fit in my research agenda, rather me fitting my research agenda into what the collaborators want. And I think that is where trust really helps to build. It was really easy to build up trust once I made sure that what is the scale of this project. And ethical issues, I think it's just the basic, just making sure that I am telling the stories that my collaborators want me to tell. That's it. Staying true to my collaborators' goals, and then I'll ask the others to join in.
Sounds great. Thank you. Yeah, it's like Elza said, it's a long story. And when I when I was telling the younger story, I felt I had this freedom of speech because I did the exhibition of the polluted photograph as an exhibition as a protest on campus to say we have to pay attention to climate change. That was 20 years ago. I was able to do that. But when I get to college, the things shift. Like we have the elephant in the room, but we're not allowed to talk to it if you still want your scholarship. And now as an American citizen, everything changed even more dramatically. I have to sign a lot of documents. So that's one of the challenges. I have to sign a lot of things to say I will not disclose the participants or the location exactly. And Mark have to sign a bunch of paperwork for me to even get into the space. And I say, I won't have a secret camera. I'll just watch everything through my eyes, and I will make it abstract enough so they won't feel targeted. And then, so if outside to sign a paper at being silent in words, that's why I didn't write any lyrics or bring any of their words to lyrics, only the movement. So that's kind of political statement on myself is the people in the community can't talk, but we can see them.
Yeah, I guess I'd answer that question too. You really got me thinking about this. And Tyler, that's a great question. As always, you've come up with a good question. I was thinking back to some of the work I did in Latin America and how was it easier, harder, different, et cetera. And I would say another element here is what we were trying to do adds a level of challenge and affordance, if you will, that maybe wasn't there in traditional ethnographic research, where I'm going and a little bit more about, you know, going to El Salvador, going to Mexico City and working with folks and saying, what is it that they're trying to do? And there's a little bit more of a translational issue there of bringing it to another audience. And in this case, doing the sort of community-based co-production really adds these elements and these challenges. And that's why I mentioned the boundary objects. One of them, for example, international. Salish Sea is an international body, just like Elja is dealing with the Schunderbonds, which is an international body. And suddenly you see how it's not a real border in terms of the ecology, you know, the orca go back and forth between it, but in terms of everything else, the sort of human ecology, ideology, et cetera, political economy, it's huge. And you suddenly run into that even with your own project. So that's just one little ways in which this sort of raised barriers. And I found that both challenging, but also productive as far as understanding what the on the ground situation, including and especially for music makers.
So the next question we have here is, can you say more about how the videos have been used by the communities / performers that you have worked with? I'm gonna let someone else start with this question.
Sure, I'm happy to jump in here. So first of all, I want to, again, highlight the tremendous work that Mark has done on ecosong.net. I mean, this is just a fantastic educational resource that is, I think, being accessed internationally as well as, you know, here within the United States. With regard to the work that I've been doing with my colleagues in Haiti, I've effectively handed them this project, and BIC, the artist that I've been working with, is a very, very prominent music professional. You know, he's got an extremely large social media following. So in Haiti, this is distributed on the réseaux sociaux, or the social networks that are popular there. And had Kumperfilo still been with us, we would have had a markedly different approach to this by being able to tap into his own radio shows. He was very, very active in talking about issues of the environment and environmental justice. So we've had to kind of reflect on, well, what does this mean after his transition as we're moving forward? That said, the materials are there. They are being used by the people who have created them, and I think that's the important part. And then the third way that I would respond to this question is that we really welcome any of you to help us out with the sharing of these videos. However they can be used, I think we're all very, very open and excited about that possibility of opening up discussion and really bringing in others to contribute to getting this discussion going even further.
And toward that end, I think that Michael, I might be wrong here, but I think the plan is to have a little bit of a break before the next session. So I don't want to move over our time, but I think all of us, Jan, Elza, and Rebecca, all of us would love to interact more with folks on these issues. If you're curious about our method or you've done something similar, this really is, as I think Rebecca just so expressed so well, is something where we're trying to engage in co-production and mean that in the largest, most expansive sense. So thank you very much for being here today. Really enjoyed telling you about our work and hearing your questions, and I hope to hear more from you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you guys so much. That was fantastic. I appreciate your time and your presentation. It was really fantastic. But yes, at this point, we are going to close the session just for a little bit, and then we will come back with our roundtable, adaptations confronting climate change amid COVID-19, beginning around 4 p.m. So we'll see you all then. And again, so many thanks to all of you.
Thank you, Michael.
Hello, and welcome to our final panel of the day. I would first like to say that we would like to acknowledge that this conference is being hosted by the Graduate Center of the City University of New York, which is located on Mannahatta, the traditional unceded territory of the Lenape. And now I would like to turn our session over to our chair, Mark PEDELTY. Mark, thank you.
Hello, and thank you everybody for being here. I want to mention that Stephen FELD was going to be the chair, and for happy reasons, he's not able to be here because his mother was just sprung from the hospital and able to get home. And so we wish him well and his family well, but he won't be able to be here today. So I will chair. The title of it is Adaptations, Confronting Climate Change Amid COVID-19. This panel was, the concept of this panel is Michael's idea, and I think it's a brilliant idea. I think we're going to really hear a lot of interesting ideas and things that I think we're all in on together in an interesting way. The format is we'll each have 5 minutes to sort of put an idea or an illustration or something on the table, leaving plenty of time, hopefully, for interaction with the audience and discussion, maybe between participants as well. All right. I will ask everybody to sort of wrap it up if they, let's see if that works. I better take away the background here. I'll wrap it up if it takes over 5 minutes, and I'll hold myself to that as well. And Stephen FELD said he was going to use a pit bull on his timer. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to find that, but we can just imagine that. And knowing Stephen, I think you'd all agree he was absolutely just joking. All right, to start, I want to briefly meet each of the participants in alphabetical order, if they can just say a little bit about themselves. And so, Aaron, can you introduce yourself to the group?
Sure. My name is Aaron Allen. I'm Director of the Environment and Sustainability Program at UNC Greensboro and an Associate Professor of Music.
Wonderful. Thank you. And Alexander?
Now I've unmuted myself. Hi, everybody. It's great to see you all. Thanks so much for having me as part of this panel. I'm Alex REHDING. I teach music theory at Harvard University, and I also work with Harvard Sound Lab.
Thanks, Alex. And Jeff?
I'm Jeff TITON. Nice to see everybody here. I'm a retired professor from Brown University, the Department of Music.
Thanks, Jeff. And Holly?
Hi, I am Holly Watkins. I'm of the musicology department at the Eastman School of Music and professor of music.
Excellent. And my name is Mark PEDELTY. I'm at the University of Minnesota and also a fellow at the Institute on the Environment. So I'll get us started. I'm going to hit my little timer for 5 minutes, like I said. And my story is pretty much a really simple COVID pivot. We're all sick of that word, I'm sure, but that's really what this is. And I want to share my screen and show you a little bit of what I'm talking about. All right. Basically, I started this project before COVID that really was partly to do with climate change, partly to do with local soil conservation and getting the community involved. It's called Sound Gardens. And these Sound Gardens have a QR code reader at the garden. It brings together local artists with local community organizations, especially those that sponsor the rain garden. And it was working out pretty well. And then COVID hit. And suddenly the digital element, which is still working pretty well. For example, Metro Blooms is still using the song from the Riverside Plaza and the garden in a lot of the work they're doing, including a fundraiser that's coming up. But these live interactions like you see here at the Riverside Garden, really, there came a point where it really was not wise. It was really impossible to fulfill that part of it, the sort of live element that brings it all together. And so I did like I said, a bit of a pivot, and I pivoted something called Together Alone. And I had proposed this as a project for EcoSong and thinking about it way back in 2016 in my book on the Salish Sea. And the idea was really inspired by this video I saw by Adrian Shalafor of the group Towers and Trees. And I thought, what a cool thing he did. He just took his guitar out, sang this song that was meaningful to him in the forest about the context generally. And I thought, why don't we do more of that? And so I kind of surmised, it's in chapter 7 of that book, about what it would be like if more of us kind of did this. And I call it Together Alone because it flips around Turkle's idea of alone together, which is kind of the alienating aspects of social media. And so long and short is, got this going under COVID, because there had been kind of mission creep to EcoSong. It turned into something very different, it turned into all of this, but really wanted to get this Together Alone project going. And it has started out really nicely. And it does a little bit what Vine Deloria talks about with our friends and informants in the field, where it brings funding and it brings support to them. And each of these artists that are involved have received from $1,000 to $1,500 to do this work and work with local organizations. And our official launch is coming up, but already we have 24 videos from around the world, especially in North America, people we're working with. And we'll always have somebody in the green room here that we're raising funding for to become the next one. And if you look in the gallery here, you can see it's a really incredible group of artists. And I will say one thing to end full circle is that it continues to, even already, even though it hasn't officially launched, it sort of continues to spawn more interactions between artists and organizations. And I want to illustrate that with one specific case in my last minute here. Just on Monday night, Metro Blooms, we did this video for Metro Blooms, where None Above, one of the groups that we're working with, created this video performance we did with them that's going to be used at their fundraiser organizing event for the fall. And so I just want to play you, because I think better than anything else, it musically gives the feel of this whole idea.
What we do to the land, we do to the rivers. What we do to the land, we do to you and me. Take us there, plant a tree, let the water breathe. What we do to the air, we do to the water.
All right, so you can see that, sort of get a feel for some of the things that have been taking place through this already generating, and we hope this continues. We hope that be able to bring artists together with place, music making place, and then stewards of those places can get together and helping them do that as kind of catalysts. So that's the pivot that I took in terms of COVID, and I think you can see the climate relation as well, hopefully. All right, great. Well, let's keep moving in turn. I have to, sorry, my little alarm is probably going to come up now. I want to make sure I get back here to the page where we can get the, great. And we will now start out with Erin Allen. Erin.
I want to at least let Denise introduce herself, because we skipped her at the outset.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Before I jumped into.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I've been with you for so long here this afternoon already. I skipped right over you. I'm so sorry.
I won't take it personally, Mark. I'm Denise von GLAHN. I teach at Florida State University. I'm a professor in the College of Music, where I'm a musicologist.
And currently facing a deluge, I know, down there in Florida. So, okay, wonderful. Thank you. Erin, if you get us started.
Okay. In the context of the climate crisis, adaptation, here we go, is the process of adjustment to actual or expected climate and its effects. In human systems, adaptation seeks to moderate or avoid harm or exploit beneficial opportunities. The COVID-19 pandemic has demonstrated humanity's various capacities for adjusting in the face of harm. Some communities are unable or unwilling to change enough, while other communities have pivoted significantly. Through it all, we've learned an important lesson about change. It must be both systemic and individual. Change must come in large-scale ways from government, science, and organizations, and in small-scale ways from individuals following laws, public health guidance, and institutional policies. When collective pandemic measures are lacking or misguided, people die. And when individuals don't change appropriately, they risk both individual and collective harm. There's been a related individual collective dichotomy in the movements addressing the climate crisis, which could be summed up in the following insidious either or question. Should we take personal measures, such as changing light bulbs, or should we rely on system approaches, such as changing our economy and infrastructure? This question sets up a dangerous binary because we need both personal actions and systemic change. Collectives are made of individuals. Both must change in order to adapt to pandemic crises and to the environmental and human crises set into motion by anthropogenic climate change. People and places are diverse, and there are varied roles to play for change at all levels. And so this gets me to Catherine Grant's essay, which was written before the pandemic, but which has been resonating with me as I get used to spending more time down on Earth. By advocating less flying for academics, Grant addresses the need for scholars of culture to formulate both personal and professional responses to the climate crisis. Professional organizations must become more inclusive and less hypocritical regarding the harms we inflict on those we study and have an unfortunate history of exploiting. Grant says that the most ethically defensible course of action is to reduce individual academic flying and simultaneously advocate for systemic change. She calculates her own academic flying emissions and lays out plans to reduce her average by 50% in 3-year increments. I'd like to suggest that the pandemic has allowed academics to adapt to life on Earth rather than in airports and on airplanes. With that in mind, here are my emissions and flight miles from the 277 flights I took between January 2010 and January 2020. I imagine many of us have similar declines in the past 2 years. These data result from my professional activities, conferences, talks, research, teaching, and so on. They include my year living in Italy and returning regularly. But the data don't account for bringing students or my own children abroad with me. And while I regularly mix family and work travel, less than 10% of these emissions are for purely non-work travel. My flying accounts for an annual average of about 3.8 metric tons of carbon emissions. This one measure does not include my emissions from driving, consumption, or infrastructure. And yet flying alone puts me at nearly double the annual carbon budget of 2 tons per person that the UN suggests could be sustainable. Simply put, my flying is unsustainable. I commit to reducing my flying emissions by half over triennial averages while advocating for other individuals and our professional organizations to do so similarly. To remain transparent and accountable, I've posted my data and commitment on my department biography webpage. I'm ashamed by these data. I'm posting them publicly and making an announcement here, part of my strategy for addressing the problem individually. I'm in a privileged position as a tenured faculty member who's already benefited from all that flying, which is why we need to change our professional systems and institutions to accommodate diminished travel and alternative experiences, precisely like the one we're enjoying this week together. As we continue to study how music reflects climate change, we must also reflect on how music and music scholars adversely impact humans and environments. Recall that the IPCC definition of adaptation incorporates how humans can exploit beneficial opportunities. It's hard to find a silver lining to the immense suffering of loss of life during the COVID-19 pandemic. And I can't seriously suggest that we find benefits in the climate crisis because it's inflicting the most harm on those who have not benefited from the emissions causing it. Nevertheless, I'd like to think that the pandemic has spurred both individual and collective adaptations that will serve us well in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aaron. And next we'll hear from Alex.
Yes, and this time I'll unmute myself. Thanks so much. That was super interesting. I've already got so many things I want to say but I'll hold back until later. And so for those of us who made it through the COVID-19 years without succumbing to the disease and without considerable impact on our livelihood, in other words, for us, the lucky ones, the main experience of this time was a period of isolation, a strange mix of nervousness and utter boredom. I remember this feeling vaguely from some past experience, until it suddenly hit me what it was. Living in Cambridge, Massachusetts on April 19th, 2013, we were under lockdown, as was the whole city of Boston, while the massive manhunt on Johar Tsarnaev otherwise known as the Boston Marathon bomber, was going on. On that day, the whole city, still reeling from the massacre a few days previously, was shut down. No traffic, no public transport, no shops. Everything lay in stunned silence for the whole day. It turns out that Johar lived only about 3 blocks away from our house. So the fear that something drastic might happen right in our neighborhood was palpable on that day. We spent the day glued to the radio and not doing much else, in a state of complete suspense on the one hand, and a state of utter tedium on the other, as we were not allowed to leave the house or do anything else. The experience of that day was intense and relatively short-lived. In the afternoon, the manhunt was called off. And about an hour after that, Johar was found and captured, shot and wounded by police. It was only after people started leaving their houses again that a resident of the suburb of Watertown discovered that Johar had been actually inside a boat in his backyard, and he alerted the police. I'm reminded of the suspenseful, eerie silence of this single day in Boston. The COVID years have been less intense and more expansive. It is impossible to maintain this level of suspense over a year and a half, but the sustained experience of powerlessness, of having to deal with the situation as it presents itself, each on their own, cut off from the larger community, is a common factor. And I don't need to spend much time here explaining how this thing that is larger than any one of us and that at the same time affects us all connects further out with the bigger challenges of climate change and the sixth extinction that we're all faced with. One thing that gave me hope during that time was a project that 2 of our graduate students, Rachna Swaminathan and Ganavya, she just goes by her first name, launched during that time. They invited their friends and loved ones to send them poems and texts that meant something to them, and they would set this to music and improvise on these texts. I was rather taken by Maya Angelou's poem, Still I Rise, at the time, and Rachna and Ganavya sent me this musical gift. I'm just going to play you a little bit, and I hope you can hear it.
You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still like dust I'll rise. Does my sassiness upset you, or are you beset with gloom? 'Cause I walk like I've got oil wells pumping in my living rooms.
I hate to cut this off, but I know we only have a short amount of time. This is the hopeful sound of getting over COVID, of creating a connection in the face of an isolating force that is larger than any one of us. And while I adore this musical rendition, it's the very end of the recording that I treasure the most. I want to play you just a couple of seconds of this. Let's see.
Pretty good for take 1. Try 1. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. You think we'll send this down? Okay. This is Rachna.
Oh, sorry. There is a personal connection and a closeness in the banter of these 2 talented and generous musicians. That is precisely what I had been missing the most. And it's this connection to other humans forged by and through music that carried me and hopefully others through the darkest days of the pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. That was incredibly moving. And now we will hear from Jeff.
Just remember to unmute myself. As I understood it, we're supposed to speak of the effects of COVID-19 and climate change on music. And although I could speak about its devastating effects on my own old-time musical community, where under non-pandemic conditions we play fiddles and banjos, sitting knee to knee, and we feel each other's presence. Instead, I plan to do the traditional ethnomusicological thing and speak about some of its effects on 2 marginalized religious communities that I visited in and written about for many decades. Their perspectives on climate change are different from mine, and I imagine they're different from yours as well. Old Regular Baptists in the coal country of the Southern Appalachian Mountains are a demonstrative, intimate group of about 10,000 people descended from the Calvinist wing of the Reformation. Their gatherings are best experienced in person. They sing lined out hymnody in heterophonic unison, often with lyrics from the 18th century and melodies of indeterminate age. They intone their prayers and they sing their sermons. In the last century, we collaborated on a music sustainability project. They say that the sound of their singing, praying, and preaching opens a mutually communicative channel of experience among them, and also between them and the presence of God. I spoke with Elwood Cornett, their association head, about the effects of COVID-19 and climate change on their music. Regarding COVID, he said there's no opposition on religious grounds to masking and social distancing, but there's longstanding mistrust of government and drug companies, so vaccine hesitancy there is significant. Some are still going to church meetings, but overall attendance is down. All are masked, and they're doing the best they can to refrain from the frequent handshaking and hugging that has characterized their meetings for centuries. Some tried church via Zoom, but it failed for lack of presence and also poor rural internet service. As for climate change, they agree that it's anthropogenic, but they point out that they've been experiencing environmental violence and ecosystem devastation in the mountains for decades. Mountaintop removals and more frequent flooding are only the latest examples. Things are different for the group of evangelical fundamentalists in Virginia's Northern Blue Ridge, who were the focus of my ethnography, Powerhouse for God. The vast majority are Trump supporters, but as Pastor Donnie Sherfy told me, everybody wants to go to heaven, but nobody wants to die. As a result of COVID, they closed church for a couple of months in 2020. They knew that Zoom church would be a failure, so they didn't attempt it. They got the idea then to try to hold church outside in the parking lot, as if it were a drive-in movie. The pastor told me he felt like he was preaching mainly to Silverados and F-150s, and he didn't much like it. None of them did. So after a few more weeks, they all went back into church, some wearing masks and some not. Like the old regulars, they experienced the sound of their singing, praying, and preaching as a demonstration of the power of the Holy Spirit. And it opens up a communication channel among them and between them and the divine presence. Now, climate change is very much on their minds. They believe it's real, and they believe that human beings have caused it, but they don't believe that it will cause the Earth's destruction. The pastor quoted Genesis 8:22 to me, quote, "As long as the earth endures, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night will never cease." But they do see climate change as another sign of the end time, rapture of the church, when, as they say, there'll be so much shouting and singing in heaven as to deafen mere mortal. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeff. And now we will hear from Denise. Denise, you're still muted.
Darn. Mark's invitation to participate in this panel gave me pause. He's a trained anthropologist in a university communications department who for years has worked on sustainability using music. I'm a trained musician and musicologist. What do I do? Like many others, COVID has increased my dependence on Zoomed interactions. My musicology seminars and classes have become virtual sites of engagement with cultural geographers, performing musicians, and environmental historians. One recent guest was Catherine Lee, an oboist who is equally at home with Baroque performance practice and improvisatory extended techniques. She joined my music and environment seminar last week and talked about her domestic silk moth project. Constrained by the pandemic from gigging and confined to her home with her 8-year-old son whose school was closed, Lee undertook to raise domestic silk moths. She was motivated by the moth's beauty and by her desire to provide a meaningful science-related experience for her son. She was also determined to continue performing, improvising, and collaborating. Discovering that silk moths made fascinating sounds throughout their life cycles, Lee placed a mic in their container and improvised on her oboe to their accompaniment. She also involved a remote human collaborator. After Lee recorded her jam session, Juniana Lanning manipulated the sounds, and then the two remote humans paired the sounds with photographs of the moth-tuned leaves that Catherine had taken and abstracted. The result is the 8-minute work called Silkies 2020. As Lee explained, without COVID, she wouldn't have spent as much time in her neighborhood park where she met someone who raised silk moths, or decided to learn about domestic silk moths, or consider the collaborative musical possibilities they presented. Knowing that Lee had collaborated with the natural world in earlier music projects, I asked her to speak about any activist intentions behind this work. She rejected the idea that she was motivated by activism at all. Rather, she explained, she responded in a purely personal way from a place of natural curiosity. She adjusted to her new COVID-restricted space, considered its possibilities, and brought her musician's sensibilities to thinking about, listening to, and musicking with the moths. Obviously, Lee's virtuosic project is not something all of us can create, but it does illuminate the value of intentional personal responses in a COVID-controlled world. Lee is not alone. In April 2022, the Reno Philharmonic, in collaboration with the Nevada Museum of Art, will premiere a 25-minute work by Peruvian composer Jimmy Lopez Bellido. His symphony, Altered Landscapes, combines music with a collection of photographs at the museum that contain images from around the world tracing the impact of humans on the planet. Altered Landscapes is as outward and grand in its gesture as Silkies is inwardly focused and contained, but both are personal responses. Lee and Bellido use music to focus on a world that lies close at hand but is easily overlooked, and to consider awe-inspiring landscapes from across the planet that take our breath away. Their projects are powerful statements about human, musical, and environmental resilience. Their creations inspire me to double down and reassess, what is it I do that does good? And what is it I do that just makes me feel good? Composing in words will likely be my most honest and impactful response to climate change in this time of COVID. But I'd like to close my 5 minutes by allowing Catherine Lee to have the last word. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Denise. I think it's the sort of letting the notes linger. It's so wonderful. All right, and finally, next we'll hear from Holly as we lead into her presentation, and then I hope people are thinking of questions and thoughts and ideas they want to share with Holly and the rest of us.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks for showing and playing that, Denise. That was incredible. I don't think anyone will object if I say that the past year and a half has been a strange time for thinking and writing. In the midst of relentless political turmoil and social unrest, pandemic solitude threw many of us back upon ourselves and our immediate domestic environments in ways by turns exhausting and rewarding. The demands of caregiving, the drudgery of quarantine, the loss of family members, and the precariousness of personal health altered and continued to alter many of our lives, including my own, in ways still difficult to assess. Given the complex ecological nature of COVID-19's origins and spread, many of us at this conference have likely come to reflect on our own positions as agents in the global economy as never before, as Aaron has just shown for us. I took the opportunity in the early days of the pandemic to realize my dream of putting in a vegetable garden, a personal desire that had swelled into a hedge against supply chain and climate disruptions alike. As I shored up the fence, dug out and prepared beds, turned in the compost, planted seeds and starts, and watched nature take its prolific course, my thoughts began to turn or return to certain fundamental questions. Socially distanced, but surrounded instead by an incredible diversity of living creatures, from snakes, frogs, songbirds, and my 2 dogs, to cucumbers, zucchini, basil, kale, chard, and tomatoes, to butterflies, bumblebees, stink bugs, and Japanese beetles, I wondered just what is the relationship between human thought and the rest of reality? Do our cognitive capacities really allow us to identify truths that can be considered valid in some region beyond human consciousness? If the speculative realism of thinkers such as Quentin Meillassoux is to be believed, then the sciences do offer access to such truths. The part of me who majored in physics would like to believe this, while the humanist in me takes to heart Bruno Latour's contention that scientific truth is produced as much as it is discovered. Moreover, following Jakob von Uexküll, if humans are no different from other creatures in being confined to their own Umwelt or environment, notwithstanding our use of tools to expand the range of our perceptions, then how can we be sure our modes of knowledge really get to the heart of things, ourselves included? Out digging in the garden, I had struck philosophical ground zero. In the ensuing months, my pandemic preoccupations oscillated between the concrete materiality of the garden and the abstract relationality of mathematics, between the sweat of physical labor and the concentrated stillness of mental effort. With teaching, meetings, the AMS, and other engagements having gone virtual, my normal musicological motivations seemed to recede far into the background, confirming that scholarly activity is, at least for me, an essentially intersubjective affair that thrives on the promise of face-to-face interaction. Zoom could just never compete. By contrast, the rarefied world of mathematics had 3 new attractions for me. First, contemplating the relative truth of scientific knowledge requires confronting what role math plays in that knowledge. And moreover, when math helps us to grasp physical processes and when it obscures them. For what is the climate crisis but a vast failure to take full account of the impact of our technologies? The equations of mathematical physics exhibit varying degrees of completeness. And until now, engineering has focused much more on what we produce with fuel-driven technologies, work, than on what we lose, heat, carbon dioxide, and other emissions. Those inefficiencies, as any climate scientist will tell you, have become newly efficacious. The enemies of human productivity have become productive with a vengeance. Second, despite its frequent difficulty, math offered me a kind of mental respite amid profound uncertainty, becoming, as Alfred North Whitehead put it, quote, a refuge from the goading urgency of contingent happenings, end quote. Faced with a potentially deadly and economy-destroying virus, I had even less desire than I normally do to tarry in the breathless, fear-provoking world of the media. Regaining my skills in math and watching my garden plants grow shared a much-needed slowness at odds with the velocity of the news cycle. Finally, and most personally, revisiting the ins and outs of differentiation, integration, and infinite series offered me a way to reconnect with my younger self, a midlife impulse if there ever was one. It's almost as if the cessation of normal activity during the pandemic disrupted the flow of time for me in other ways, allowing me to circle back to older concerns. And let me just say that attempting to relearn things one has completely forgotten can be a deeply humbling experience. Will all of this lead me back to musicology? Possibly, given the longstanding connections between music and math. But for now, I'm just going to keep thinking about the history and science and practice of math, tending my fall plantings and pondering between the extremes of vegetal materiality and mathematical abstraction, the perplexing continuities and discontinuities of life. Thank you.
Thank you, Holly. That was wonderful. And now we have the opportunity to open up the floor, and that is not only questions and thoughts from the audience, but also panelists, if you have some thoughts you'd like to throw out to get us started. One that I have that we don't have to necessarily entertain here is that it just really comes to mind the way in which our music scene has been kind of hit in the face. It's almost like Timothy Morton calls it a hyper object as far as COVID, that we had to react to it in some way. And for musicians, like I just talked to a musician the other day, Timothy Gustafson, who said, you know, what I do today is I plan gigs and then I cancel them, you know. I think climate change felt like it was more of a optional reaction in our musicking, and you know, and now COVID kind of made us do that. I'm curious if COVID has we've learned anything as far as potential ways moving forward to make our music that hopefully, you know, will change in a positive way. That's just one thought I had.
Mark, if I could just be so bold as to speak on Catherine's behalf, one of the great lessons she learned was the realization of invisible collaborators that were around her in her container of domestic silk moths. I found that very hopeful. I wasn't prepared to come out of that particular session of class feeling optimistic, but I did. And Holly's mentioning of a much needed slowness, I discovered that was a benefit to me of COVID. I didn't want to think of it as something that, oh, good for me, I get to slow down. But as a matter of fact, it has been reparative for me. Just a few thoughts.
Yeah, if I could add to that, I think, you know, there's been a slowing down, but my concern now is whether that's been a derailing. Like the idea of how to get back to normal, it's just eluding me right now. And I don't know if others are finding that, but I just feel so disrupted or pushed out of my normal way of doing things that it's very hard for me to see. I mean, I'm sure there'll be some natural drift back into what I normally do, but I'm just wondering if others are feeling that this is really a before and after in certain ways of scholarly activity, whether that's people turning to more activist projects or turning inward more, which is sort of my response. But I'm curious what others have to say about that.
Alex, go ahead. I think you had a thought.
Yeah, I mean, I have so many thoughts swirling around my head. Let me just, I wanted to say something to your point, Mark, and then I'll say something to Holly's question. When you mentioned this, the point about the musicians, making gigs and then canceling them, I was reminded of one event I did with Raja and Ganavia, the two musicians I played earlier. And they live together, they are a couple. And we had a webinar where they were on separate screens in separate rooms, and then they performed and suddenly one appeared on the screen of the other. And that was so startling to see, to have that isolation with each person on their individual screen just suddenly ruptured, and to have two people together. And I think, it wasn't really anything that they were thinking about, but that really made such a stark impression, this idea, oh God, there is actual physical proximity between people. And yeah, we remember what that was like. And Yeah, Holly, your question about is it a before and an after? Yes, I think so. Here's a confession. I took up sewing. I had an old sewing machine, and so that was my my COVID project. I'm still really lousy at it, but it's also something that I just hadn't made time for, and it's I think it's just. For me, it's a different approach to the way we spend time. And I think it's, it's much more conscious and much more aware. And, I mean, I think we all had various forms of Zoom burnout as part of COVID. And I think, a lot of people, probably all of us, had this initial sense that we just had to do all this work, that we kind of, we had to write much more and much faster. And I think at some point, I certainly hit a wall, and I think a lot of other people did too. And yeah, hopefully some of the lessons of COVID have been salutary.
I would certainly agree that some of the lessons have been very good, and thinking about travel, as I have, not only Zoom burnout, but also travel burnout. I mean, I was getting to that point, juggling small children and administrative duties and wanting to go to conferences and upping myself in the middle of the semester. So that was happening well before the pandemic hit. And I think that being forced not to go was certainly finding some of that slow. And I'll just say, I'm not stopping travel entirely. In fact, right now I'm planning to take my students again to Italy next summer for our kind of what was a planned biennial. Now it's turned into triennial summer class, studying music and history and sustainability, traveling in Italy. And certainly I've seen in all the messaging that I follow about travel in Italy that slow travel, like slow food and like slow other things, is really come to the fore much more. And a lot of the fast tourism is aiming to slow down for the benefit of the people and for the tourists. So I think that there are going to be that the normal is going to be a new normal, and that we shouldn't go back to the old normal.
Thanks, Aaron. And sorry, I was going to say, Jeff, you might have a thought on this thread, and then we have a question from the audience after Jeff weighs in.
Well, I learned to hate travel at an earlier age, so you can have my carbon offsets. Holly, I wanted to respond to one of the things that you said. I've gotten a lot of good ideas in many years of organic gardening. And I was reminded about what the perspective on COVID might be from animals and plants. If we could imagine ourselves an animal or a plant, of course we are animals, but in any case, a different animal. And I was reminded that in the garden, the roots of plants are sensitive to sound. Experiments have shown, for example, that plant roots will move towards the sound of water, and also that nitrogen-fixing bacteria will move in the direction of roots when they hear the sounds that the roots make as they grow in the soil. Of course, they also respond to the chemicals that the roots give off. There's a wonderful sonic world that's going on down there, and I believe it's a real world. I don't think it's a constructed world. I think that if you and I died, it would continue to go on, and if all humans died, perish the thought, it would continue to go on. I'm reminded of Dr. Johnson's response to a question about idealism, where he, I can't remember who it was, he was refuting some philosopher. He kicked a rock and he said, "There, I refute you," because he hurt himself. He hurt his foot when he kicked the rock. So let's take heart from some of this and spend more time in our gardens. I know that I know that many of the rest of you are gardeners too, so that's wonderful.
Thanks, Jeff. And it's a perfect segue to our first audience question, actually, when you mentioned roots and the unseen and questions of scale have come up here. And we have a second question too about teaching after that I think will nicely resonate with what Denise and Alex brought us. But the first question comes from Andrew Chung, and it's, I'm curious if the panelists had any thoughts on how COVID and climate change present similar and dissimilar problems of scale. In COVID, we learned, at least initially, that it's actually possible to change most of a global population's practices. Yet the temporality of threat is so wildly disparate between COVID and climate change. So anybody have any thoughts on a question of scale and how these things are, COVID, climate change, similar and dissimilar as far as the things we're talking about?
I think it's a great question. I would just throw out the idea of empathy, that if anything, you know, that short time scale can help us empathize and to build the capacity then for thinking on that larger time scale. But at the same time, there are some places where climate change is very real and now and not far out. For some of us, of course, it is further out. But I think that the idea of building empathy and that capacity to take others' perspectives as they encounter trouble is something that we can hopefully push from the COVID experience to the climate experience.
It's a good question for any ecologist because scale is so important. But the scale of pandemics is likely to continue. COVID may pass, but that's going to be an ongoing, presumably it's going to be an ongoing issue for human beings. So.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I mean, I went to talk at our Center for the Environment yesterday, and you know, I mean, the area where COVID and climate change come together is, of course, public health, and you know, that's sort of where the rubber hits the road, and I think the question of scale is exactly spot on. And the question that comes up is, why are we willing to spend so much money on one but not on the other? And you know, various people have asked that question. And you know, what can climate change learn from the COVID experience in terms of policy, in terms of rhetoric, in terms of effectiveness? And I'm also actually, I want to pivot back to Aaron's talk right at the beginning, because you made the really important point about individual responsibility and collective action, and how, you know, that sets up a false dichotomy. And I think that's exactly right, that, you know, it cannot be one or the other. And I don't know if any of you remember an op-ed maybe 2 months ago in the New York Times on that question. Was it in the New York Times? It was in one of the big papers that made a claim that I initially really disagreed with, where he's, you know, was basically arguing against the notion of the carbon footprint, and you know, said, you know, don't buy into this because that's just what the fossil fuel industry wants you to believe. And you know, bleeding heart liberal that I am, I was like, no, don't take that away from me. But you know, there is something to be said that this sets up a false dichotomy that puts the onus on the individual away from corporations and policy changes. And I think that's why your point, Aaron, is so important, that it can't be one or the other, but it needs to be both. And the art is to figure out how we get from individual action, the part that each of us has control over, to the broader goal of policy change.
I think that was probably Rebecca Solnit in The Guardian.
Yeah. In The Guardian, yeah, that's the one. Thank you. Yes.
And you know, there's a validity to that critique. I've seen it a couple times over the past few years because of the research that's been done into the fossil fuel industry and everything. At the same time, the history of the ecological footprint, the concept kind of predates this, and the climate industry took it over. And so ecological footprint from a more kind of generic sense is a totally valid concept that has been, that ecologists measure and model for various scales, and that industry took over. So we shouldn't throw it out, none of the throwing out the baby with the bathwater kind of thing. But we can operate criticizing one and adopting another, even if they're related, and carry on, in that both and kind of framework.
Well, thank you. And I think that leads us again naturally into the what might be our final question. We'll see if we get another one and have time by the time we get to the top of the hour. This one has to do with teaching. It's from Tyler Kinnear. And he says, for those of you teaching during these challenging times, I'm curious of your observations of student behavior in the virtual classroom. Do you find students are more engaged, eager to create and share, or disconnected, even removed? For students that are already struggling, do you find your courses in music are especially meaningful to them during these challenging and difficult times? Alex gave an example of students responding to a horrific event through poetry and improvisation. Denise shared the Silkworm Project. Have others observed similar needs to create under such circumstances? Given that you so nicely brought us the question of teaching to start, Denise, do you have any thoughts on in response to Tyler?
Great question, Tyler. Thanks for it. I have found that in larger classes, Zoom allows a kind of anonymity and disconnection that is almost the opposite of what has happened in smaller classes, where virtual teaching almost seems to become more intimate. Virtual seminars become almost more intimate. People like bringing their dinners to the desk, the cats walking across their keyboard, and there's something that has humanized our endeavor being on Zoom, which would not have happened if we all went to the same place with the desks or the table. And so I hate to sound like a Pollyanna, because I know I'm in an extraordinarily privileged position, and I am not any kind of a minority or a marginalized person who has really been hit differently and harder. But I don't find that engagement is necessarily the problem. In my own classrooms, what I find very difficult is a practice that I've always had, which is a lot of group projects. And group projects where they make music, they come up with solutions and they present them to each other in the classrooms. Here's where economics really hits. There are students, because I'm in a big college of music, who have phenomenal sound setups in their homes, and then others who don't. And that is a kind of exposure that doesn't happen in a real classroom, where we all have access to the same materials. And because the College of Music is a very high power College of Music, it has all the materials. That has been something that I don't know how to get around. Now, this semester, we're having to teach in person as much as we can, though I have regular sessions that are virtual, and I bring in various speakers, as I mentioned. So we are able to expand our pool of participants because of the virtuality of Zoom, but I miss those projects, and the students miss them. It's very hard to simulate real music making with a variety of technical abilities, really. Alex, you're smiling broad.
Sorry, I think you're absolutely right. It is, I was actually smiling because I was thinking of one rule that our university orchestra is wrestling with, because the wind instruments can only play if they cover their instruments in plastic bags, and it's not working well, let's just say. But I had a strange experience, because I taught a big gen ed class for the first time Zoom last year, and I had no prior experience. I had nothing to compare it with, but what I found was that, a lot of people checked out and kind of, enjoyed the anonymity of the Zoom experience. But I had a group of, a hardcore of about, well, a good dozen students who were just incredibly active and with it, and, would answer questions and made a real discussion possible. And I'm now teaching this class in person for the first time, and it's bigger than last time. And I want to say the students are not as engaged as they were on Zoom last year. It might just be because we're in week 5 or 6 of the semester, and everybody is a little bit checked out, and that might just be my momentary experience of it. But I in retrospect, I kind of like teaching on Zoom.
I agree, Alex. There was something about the technology that I think our students, particularly the younger ones, really resonated with, and were able, the chat function, for example, kept the discussion going, brought up questions when I was giving little lectures, that would come back, or the discussions from group breakouts would continue. And so that, I think that was definitely there. But I will say, just very briefly, teaching at a school where we are approximately half non-white, 2/3 women, and a great majority Pell Grant recipients, the economic aspects and the kind of first generation aspects have been profound. And just the lack of, I have over 100 students that I'm responsible for in advising the undergraduate level and the graduate level, and just trying to keep up with them and check in with them during advising period, and then in my classes, the disappearing students, and my grandmother died, or such and such. I mean, so many things coming up, really making it complicated just to kind of keep moving along and get to the end of the semester, to say nothing about creativity. I haven't been teaching music classes for years. I'm only teaching environment and sustainability classes. But it's been a real struggle, I would say, for the great majority of our students, just to make it to the end of the semester, not even to do well or to be creative. It's been a real struggle. So I've heard of some wonderful things happening, and it was nice. It's always nice to hear of them. But I've been experiencing a lot of the unhappier stuff that I think is probably more representative of the socioeconomic kind of makeup of my university.
I think there's one other aspect, and that is the assumption that the faculty can have quite elaborate systems and setups. And that's on us. No one's giving us $2,500 to go out and buy yourself a bigger screen, a better camera, better cables. We've just upgraded to a gig of a new provider, because we were on 25 megabytes for 2 people who were trying to do Zoom, and it was impossible. And so, but it costs. And so it's my privilege that allows me to do that, but I can't assume that some of my students who are first family members, college graduates, have a couple $1,000s sitting around to upgrade their systems. And so I think there's a huge economic imbalance here. And that's the thing I worry about most in my classes.
Right, absolutely. And on this theme, as we're to the top of the hour of both the sort of challenges and affordances of the technology and the opportunities, I want to say that I'm going to have to check out for this very reason. I'm teaching a course with my colleague, Kirsten Foote at University of Washington, and we've combined both of our classes together. And a little bit of a mini emergency arose where I need to make sure I am in that session today. I'm not going to say bi-coastal, but that bi-institutional. So everybody's very welcome to stick around and informally continue. But for those that would like to leave, we're at the top of the hour. Thank you so much, everybody. This has been a wonderful session, and I hope that we get to continue this discussion at a later date.
Thanks very much, Mark. I'll be signing off too, and it's great to see all of you. See all of you, and good luck with the future.
I'm signing off as well. Thank you for this privilege.
Take care, everybody. Great to see you.
Nice to see everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. I look forward to the future sessions.
So if everybody is going to be signing off, then one last time, I would like to thank the members of the Humanities in the Changing Climate session, Rebecca, Jan, Mark, Eliza, and our roundtable discussants, Aaron, Mark, Alex, Jeff, Denise, and Holly. Please join us all tomorrow when we'll feature panels dedicated to organology, indigeneity, and the Anthropocene. Again, many thanks to you all, and we look forward to seeing you tomorrow.